Georgiana Lynn Kibido Saunier.
During this investigation, you said you conducted how many investigations?
Interviews or
Interviews.
We conducted more than 35 interviews. Lieutenant Graham asserted that during his interaction with Kevin Blake in the pool, that he was trying to get Mr. Blake to perform like the other cadets had done, and to get him to complete the physical activity just as the other cadets had also completed. Because Mr. Blake was in the video seen to be closer to the shallow end and Mr. Blake could touch, Lieutenant Graham's purpose was to get him where he could not touch the bottom of the pool in order to make him swim and not utilize the bottom of the pool for any type of support. That was the purpose of his interaction, is what he told us. And then he told us that during his interaction that Mr. Blake tried to grab on him and that he was not able to touch the bottom of the pool, and although a good swimmer, he still believed that he could be pushed underwater and things of that nature, which is why he asserted that he reached up and grabbed Mr. Blake by the neck to force Mr. Blake to release his grasp on him, and this was after Lieutenant Graham stated that he had actually tried to push Mr. Blake away from him.
Based upon your gathering of information from your interview, what was your conclusion?
Based off the interviews and the video surveillance, what we determined was that although Lieutenant Graham may have perceived at that moment that, or stated that there was some threat and that is why he used the application of the pressure to the throat, ultimately, if you watch the surveillance video, Lieutenant Graham placed himself in the position on multiple times to be in very close proximity to Cadet Blake. Therefore, that is officer-induced jeopardy, which is more typically used in criminal investigations, which is where a great amount of my experience comes from. However, it's still applicable in this case, wherein he placed himself in jeopardy, and therefore he had to use the application of force because he felt like he was being threatened in order to stop the force being used against him. So although the cadets did not see the entirety of the incident, they did see bits and pieces of it. And I believe it was 8 cadets that actually said that they saw a physical interaction between Lieutenant Graham and Mr. Blake, and saw Lieutenant Graham push Mr. Blake at some point in time.
Did you find any violation of the state police policy?
Yeah, so in reviewing the policies and taking in consideration the documents we had reviewed and the interviews that we had conducted along with the surveillance video footage, it was determined that conduct unbecoming of an officer would be most fitting because it encompassed all parts pretty much of what had occurred during this particular incident.
When you began your interviews with all of these 35 plus witnesses, isn't it true that you started the interview by informing the witness that this was a use of force or potential use of force incident?
Absolutely. And yes, I would state in several interviews, but I was not conducting them by myself, there were other people conducting them also, that it was related to a potential use of force incident.
Did you make the decision that there was a policy violation in this case?
I suggested the policy violation of conduct unbecoming. At any point in time, the disciplinary review committee can state, even during the DRC, that they feel that another policy is most appropriate. So we suggest them. That does not mean that that is an absolute. So conduct unbecoming was most fitting because Lieutenant Graham is definitely someone who has been around for many years in state police and especially in the training academy. He is well respected. There's no doubt that he's a great instructor. I absolutely wholeheartedly believe that. However, when it came to this particular instance and his interaction with the cadet, with Mr. Blake in particular, those actions were not a true representation of what state police stands for. It was not, it does bring discredit upon our agency and our training practices. It does put us in a light wherein the public may see it, and that causes more problems for the agency as a whole. The practices that Lieutenant Graham said were common practices were not like a concurrent belief amongst all of his peers. And it was absolutely, it did not show favorably upon him nor the agency as a whole. We have a high standard. At that time, our academy was more paramilitary, and we were a paramilitary organization, but it was definitely a paramilitary environment. But I don't know when it has ever been appropriate to put your hands in that manner on a cadet unless you are training in a particular scenario, in defensive tactics, and it is in a dangerous, and the aggravating circumstance in this was the fact that it was in a body of water. And that is not appropriate, and it does not reflect favorably upon us as an agency as a whole, nor on him.
Okay, it's in the middle paragraph, the second paragraph, right in the middle of that paragraph. It starts with, again, when they exited the water. Do you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Again, when they exited the water, Cadet Blake said he would not quit. Lieutenant Graham told him they would continue training, walk to the deep end, and he pushed Cadet Blake into the water as to make sure he would not hit the side of the pool on his way in.
Yes, ma'am. I see that.
Okay. Now, do you recall, or isn't it true that Lieutenant Graham never admitted in his interview that he pushed Cadet Blake into the pool?
That's incorrect.
Okay. Did you mark in the audio interview of the portion of that interview where Lieutenant Graham said that?
Somewhere around a little over 1 hour into his interview, Lieutenant Graham admits that he had pushed Blake into the pool, as he had done so with other cadets when either they hesitated to go into the pool or seemed tired, and then he would do that. Yes, ma'am, he did.
Okay. Well, I have the portion of the audio interview from that day, and I'd like to provide that right now.
For example, I just this class alone, I've pushed several cadets off the edge, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, and I don't know, I went off on a tangent, but if this is the edge of the pool, and the cadet who's worried or tired a little bit, they start just stepping off, and instead of stepping off into the water, they'll step and turn and just kind of fall into the water. Well, you're looking at about a 4-foot drop before their elbow can hit the edge of that concrete and crack. So there have been several times, and Cadet Jones in this academy is probably the one that I was the roughest, and y'all are investigating me for this, you might as well look at Cadet Jones, because he was freaking out about everything, right? So Cadet Jones would stand on the edge of the pool, and he would freak out if his head went in the water, even in the shower. He'd have his feet on the ground, he'd put his head in the water, he'd freak out. So what he was trying to do was step in, turn, and catch the side as he was falling, so he could keep his head over the water. It's extremely dangerous for his face, for his elbow. That's what I always think about, is a cracked elbow.
Yeah.
I saw that happen once in my life, and it's freaking out.
You talk about his broken finger even.
Yeah, but you imagine it from 4 feet up, a 180, 200 pound person comes down and cracks an elbow on that concrete edge. It's going to shatter, and then they're done. So Jones is probably my best example. There were several times where he would try to turn and fall in, and I would push him off to make sure that he wasn't anywhere near that edge. Now, for the most part, we have those conversations before that happens. And if I see somebody do it once, I go over there and get in their face and tell them, hey, you got to step off. You can't do that. So that's for me in the pool, that's a very common occurrence.
Okay.
I'm on a regular basis. And
Okay.
partly it freaks me out when I see them doing that, because I'm just waiting for them to their face.
Now, have you ever done that where you push them into the pool because there's a hesitation? It's kind of like, I'm scared of heights, and so if I ever go do anything where heights are involved, sometimes I'll tell whatever the person that's with me, participating with me, or the person like strapping you up and
Just push me.
Just push me because
So-
I don't know if I can do this.
So no, I wouldn't do that if they're just not moving, and I'll use Blake as my example. I can't tell you how many times I'm in his ear saying, get in the water, get in the water, get in the water. And typically, for whatever reason, for him, it was 4 times. You had to say something 4 times then for him to take action. Now, if there's the hesitation where he starts to, and he's at the edge and he's starting to go, but he ain't going too far, I'm gonna help him. I'm gonna get him away from that edge. But just because you're not getting in, I'm chunking you in.
Okay,
I might do that to like Sammy Robinson as a joke, but I wouldn't do that to a cadet.
okay, all right.
Okay, so I just played 104 through
It's 108.50.
108.50.
Is that the area where you said that was
Yes,
said?
sir.
Okay. Let's take a short break. I want the lawyers to meet again.
Sergeant Kibido Sonia, after listening to the audio recording of Russell Brand's interview from the Internal Affairs investigation, would you agree with me that Lieutenant Graham did not state to you that he pushed Cadet Blake into the pool on February 16, 2022?
He did not make that exact statement. Yes, I would concur with you.
Would you consider the cadet to be cheating, maybe by not, performing the same physical exercise as the rest of the class?
So that's absolutely a consideration. Being through the academy myself, you want everyone to work for it. It is hard. It's not for everybody. You don't want a sandbagger, which somebody who doesn't perform equally. However, in reviewing the surveillance video and speaking with Trooper Garrett, or now Sergeant Garrett, who was in charge of physical training that day, and who described what their physical training was that day, the video shows that Cadet Blake was actually required to perform more than the other cadets.
You referred to Lieutenant Graham as the aggressor today. Is that what you believe? He was the aggressor in this incident?
It absolutely evolved into that, wherein he became the aggressor because he continuously placed himself, and he was continuously the one to push and pull on Mr. Blake when there were, when the corrective activity exercises do not include the pool. So, and him as an academy instructor for many, many years. On March 2nd is when the investigation began.